Why does the most formative phase of Jesus' life remain absent in the traditional Gospels? Between his 12th and 30th years, the scriptures maintain a thick and intriguing silence, almost as if they wanted to hide something. This absence resonates like a purposeful enigma, provoking the mind and spirit of those who dare to question. For many, these 18 years of gap are merely a curiosity, but for the seekers, this interval is a gateway to something much larger. When one looks beyond the surface of the canonical texts, it becomes apparent that this void is, in fact, an invitation to deep investigation into what really happened to the young Nazarene before he became the Master of Hearts. The silence is not an absence, it's a key, an ancient password hidden beneath layers of religious and political control, delimited by councils that decided what should or should not be told. Jesus was not in spiritual rest. He was on a pilgrimage, absorbing knowledge forgotten by time. While many picture him in Nazareth as a carpenter or engaged in simple Jewish prayers, the oral tradition of various cultures points to a quiet and transformative journey towards the east. There are records left by Tibetan mystics, manuscripts in the Ladakh region, and even echoes in ancient Egyptian scrolls that mention the presence of a master coming from the west. He is said to have walked through deserts, crossed mountain ranges, sat with ascetic masters, and conversed with Brahmins and lamas. What was he seeking? He was not seeking religion, but rather universal spiritual wisdom, that which pulses beyond doctrines and speaks directly to the soul. This thirst for the absolute, this drive for liberating knowledge and not for confinement, led Jesus on paths where few dared to go. And it is in this historical silence that one of the greatest mysteries of humanity is hidden. The method of awakening the soul that he experienced, far from the borders of Israel. The canonical texts themselves subtly insinuate that there was something different in his way of seeing the world when he returned. He was not just a rabbi or a prophet. His words carried the vibration of someone who had transcended human limitations. His gestures, his parables, his gaze, everything indicated a fusion between ancestral wisdom and infinite compassion. But this internal alchemy does not come from nowhere. It is the fruit of initiations, encounters, and experiences that shaped his consciousness and refined his spirit. If the soul is an instrument, he had learned to tune it. And where would he have learned this, if not in the centers of wisdom where mysticism was taught as a science of the spirit? The absence of official records does not mean that the facts did not exist. On the contrary, the suppression is often a sign that the content is too transformative for the standards of institutional control. When studying ancient civilizations such as Egypt, Vedic India, and the mystical schools of Tibet, we realize that they all shared the view that the human soul is a field of conscious energy, capable of being awakened, expanded, and enlightened. Could it be a coincidence that the teachings of Jesus echoed these same truths? Love as healing vibration, forgiveness as energetic release, silence as divine connection, the kingdom of God as an internal state. All of this resonates with the teachings of initiatory schools that preceded Christianity. When we understand this, we begin to see that Christ was not born from an isolated miracle, but from a profound journey of integration between the human and the divine. Jesus was initiated into the same traditions that, for centuries, prepared souls to serve as bridges between heaven and earth. The Gnostic Gospels, discovered in Nag Hammadi, shed light on this perspective. In their texts, Jesus not only preaches, but guides his disciples through internal processes of self-knowledge, transmutation, and spiritual elevation. He reveals secrets about the body of light, about the middle path, and about the inner worlds of the soul. These Gospels were considered heretical not because they contradicted Christ, but because they revealed a dimension too profound for external control of faith. In them, Jesus is a master of consciousness, not just a martyr. He leads his followers to awaken the divine spark, teaching that the true temple is internal and that the kingdom is within each being. This breaks with the idea of external salvation and invites deep spiritual responsibility. A direct call to enlightenment. But why hide this part of the story? The answer is uncomfortable, yet necessary. Authentic spiritual power liberates the human being, while institutional control depends on ignorance. the image of a Jesus who learned from the great masters of antiquity, who transcended religiosity to touch the universal sacred, represented a danger to power structures. Therefore, they erased his steps, silenced the evidence, and canonized only the fragments that served the political religious dominion of the time. However, the truth pulses in the archives of the collective soul, in the apocryphal texts, in the mystical traditions that survived the persecutions. And now, more than ever, this truth resurfaces as a call to remembrance. The soul recognizes what the intellect doubts, and many feel, even without physical proof, that Jesus was not just an isolated miracle, but the result of a lengthy process of spiritual refinement. He walked the same paths that other avatars walked before: Siddhartha Gautama, Krishna, Zoroaster, Moses. Not to copy them, but to complete the cycle of truth that they all had been revealing in parts. Each step taken outside of Israel was part of a cosmic preparation, which would culminate in the Great Mission, to show that the divine dwells in the human, and that the soul, when awakened, can become light in the world. This is the real good news, not the religion about him, but the consciousness with him. The disappearance of historical evidence does not diminish the power of spiritual facts. On the contrary, time only intensifies the call to look deeper. What Jesus learned outside of Israel was not mere philosophy, it was a direct initiation into the art of ascending in life. He became a master because he first allowed himself to be an apprentice. He touched the feet of the wise, fasted in deserts, meditated in caves, crossed paths with elders who guarded the mysteries of the universe. This erased trajectory is not a detail. It is the foundation that supported the strength of Christ who touched multitudes. Understanding this is to reconstruct not just the biography of a man, but the map of possible awakening for all of us. Every lost detail carries a clue about the origin of your spiritual authority, the tone of your voice, the peace you radiate, the magnetism of your presence. All these attributes do not arise from dogmas, but from deep spiritual practice. What he learned outside of Israel was not just knowledge, it was inner transformation. It was mastery over impulses, over the ego, over time. He became a mirror of eternity in flesh. The silence of the official Gospels can no longer hide what the soul yearns to remember. The key lies in rediscovering what has been hidden, the method, the path, the art that awakens the soul to its true identity. With each step taken in the reconstruction of this hidden journey, the seeker's soul feels an echo. It's as if, even without material evidence, something deeply true is being revealed. This happens because spiritual awakening does not occur through logic, but through the vibrational recognition of truth. When you hear it, you feel it. When you feel it, you awaken. And when you awaken, you start to remember who you are and what you came to do in this world. What Jesus learned far from his homeland is what many today seek to find, the bridge between the earthly world and the divine. And this bridge begins in each person's awakened heart. The silence of the lost Gospels is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of the journey. When we look at the map of the ancient world and trace the paths taken by the great caravans, we realize that the East was not a distant world for those seeking wisdom, but a true sanctuary of living spiritual knowledge. Jesus, in this time veiled between his adolescence and the beginning of his public mission, would have followed these sacred routes, not as a tourist or trader, but as an apprentice thirsty to understand the mysteries of existence. There are reports that point to his presence in places like Tibet, India, Persia, and Egypt, lands where spirituality was science, where the soul was understood as a temple, and where enlightenment was treated with the same seriousness that we give to quantum physics today. These paths are not esoteric legends, but clues left by traditions that survived the destruction of official records. And it is in them that we find signs that the historical Christ was, above all, a disciple of universal truth. Manuscripts preserved in Tibetan monasteries, like those found by Nikolai Notovich in the 19th century in the Himalayas, describe the presence of a Western sage named Issa, who lived among the Brahmins and Buddhists, absorbing their teachings and debating with their masters. According to these sources, Issa condemned castes and preached the unity of the human soul, ideas that would later echo in his speeches about unconditional love and divine equality. The similarity between the teachings attributed to Isa and the words of Jesus in the Gospels is so striking that various scholars have seriously considered the possibility that they might be the same person. Religious authorities have tried to discredit these records, but the details are so specific and the culture described with such accuracy that it would be impossible for a 19th century Westerner to forge such a narrative without having lived or studied deeply in the East. In India, the Vedic schools practiced methods of expanding consciousness that would later be recognized in subtle passages of the Gospels. The use of silence as a tool for accessing the divine, the mastery of breathing to transcend the senses, the focus on the present moment as a gateway to eternity. All these elements are present both in Eastern tradition and in the teachings of the Master of Nazareth. The very concept of the kingdom of heaven not as a place, but as an inner state, is almost identical to samadhi, the enlightenment described in the Yoga Sutras. Jesus, in preaching that the kingdom is within you, reveals that he speaks not only the language of the prophets, but of a fusion between East and West. It was not about forced syncretism, but about a universal truth that he recognized and fully lived. It is likely that Jesus had visited the learning centers of Benares, participated in the purification rituals at the Ganges, and listened to the Vedic chants under the ancient trees that have witnessed centuries of spiritual revelations. In such places, the soul was considered eternal, the body a vehicle, and the ego an illusion to be transcended. These same concepts later appear in his deeper dialogues, such as in Conversations with Nicodemus, when he speaks about being born again, or when he teaches that he who loses his life shall find it. These are ideas that challenge common logic, but make sense within a spiritual framework that sees the human being as a traveler of eternity. The language of Jesus changes completely after this hidden period, indicating a profound internal reconfiguration. His connection with the Father becomes direct. His understanding of the law transcends the letter and rises to the spirit. The parallels with Buddhism are even more striking. The notion of compassion as a central practice, non-judgment, teaching through parables that break rigid mental structures, all of this resonates with the Buddha's discourses, and more. The idea that suffering stems from spiritual ignorance, that liberation comes through the awakening of consciousness and surrender to the present moment. All these ideas make up the heart of Jesus' teachings. And where else could he have learned such principles, if not in places where these truths had been flourishing for centuries? The connection between enlightened souls is not dependent on borders. Christ recognizes Buddha not by name but by vibration. He understands that truth is not the property of one religion, but an eternal call of the human soul to its divine origin. During his journey through ancient Persia, Jesus may have come into contact with the descendants of the Zoroastrian Magi, keepers of a doctrine where fire symbolizes the light of consciousness and good battles evil not through violence, but through a conscious choice for truth. There, he would have learned about cosmic cycles, about the struggle between light and shadow within each being, and about the mission of divine messengers who appear in times of spiritual crisis to rekindle the spark in sleeping souls. This knowledge reappears in his speeches when he warns about the wolves in sheep's clothing and the need to keep the lamp lit. Fire as a symbol of divine presence, also found in the Hebrew tradition, gains in Jesus a vibrational depth that could only have been refined by direct contact with these initiatic centers. Egypt, in turn, kept in its mystery schools teachings about spiritual rebirth, the journey through the invisible world, the activation of the body's energy centers, and the ascension of the soul to the divine throne. It's hard to ignore that many of these teachings were inscribed on the walls of the temples of Luxor, Karnak, and in the symbolism of the pyramids, which were not just tombs, but genuine spiritual laboratories. Jesus, when speaking about the Father's house with many rooms, about the narrow path, and about seeing without eyes and hearing without ears, is clearly aligned with the initiatory language of Egypt, where perception was trained to go beyond the five senses. He was saying, "There is more than the eyes can see. Reality does not end with matter. There is a subtle world that sustains everything, and only the awakened heart can access it." These encounters were not merely learning experiences, but true initiations. Each spiritual culture he came into contact with prepared him for something grand. And it wasn't just about accumulating esoteric knowledge, but about living it intensely in body and soul. He fasted, meditated, served, was challenged, confronted with inner shadows, until his divine identity emerged with unwavering clarity. This process cannot be learned from books. It is transmitted from heart to heart, from master to disciple, and that's why the oral tradition preserves what books have erased. Because the living truth does not fall silent, it continues to echo in the silence of the deserts, in the chants of ancient temples, and now within those who listen with the soul. When Jesus returns to the land of his ancestors, he is no longer the same. His presence is different. His authority does not come from tradition, but from an invisible cosmic source. He speaks as one who has seen the unseen, as one who has pierced the veils of reality and returned with a map for the human soul. His miracles are not tricks, but manifestations of universal laws that he has learned to master. His compassion is not sentimentality, but the direct result of understanding that we are all expressions of the same one. His steadfastness is not rigidity, but the outcome of someone who has overcome himself. And his sweetness is the natural fragrance of one who has become one with love. These hidden journeys were not deviations from his mission, they were its foundation. The East did not divert him from the truth of Israel. It deepened him. It showed him that the covenant with God goes beyond a people, a scripture, or an institution. It is eternal, intimate, and can only be sealed in the intimacy of the awakened heart. Jesus did not abandon his Hebrew root. He expanded it to infinity. He understood that the light that guided Moses was the same that illuminated the wise men of India, the Tibetan masters, and the Egyptian initiates. And by merging all of this within himself, he became the living reflection of unity. Today, understanding these journeys is not just historical curiosity. It's reconnecting with a truth that can set us free. It means remembering that we are all spiritual travelers, that each culture holds fragments of the whole, and that Christ did not come to establish a religion, but to light a beacon within each soul. The path he tread outside of Israel is the same one we are all called to tread within ourselves, a sacred journey towards awakening. In a time when the world still whispered the secrets of the soul through symbols, Egypt shone like a mystical beacon that spanned the centuries with its ancient wisdom. Jesus, in his quest to understand the divine not as an idea, but as a living experience, would have crossed the portals of this civilization where spirituality and science were one and the same. Egypt was not merely a place of tombs and pharaohs. It was the cradle of a knowledge that saw the human being as a microcosm of the universe, a living temple to be deciphered and elevated. In this land of gods and initiates, the mysteries of Isis and Thoth were only passed on to those who proved ready to symbolically die and be reborn as beings aware of their divine origin. And it is precisely this invisible rite of passage that would have marked the soul of the young master, shaping him to become the one who would later be recognized as Christ. Thoth, the scribe of the gods, was the master of wisdom, patron of the initiated, and guardian of the secrets of creation. His teachings were not concepts, but experiences that led the disciple to awaken their cosmic memory, activate their higher mind, and transcend the boundaries of linear reality. At the heart of his doctrine was the idea that the entire universe is mind, and that visible reality is merely a projection of the invisible. Jesus, in stating that what you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, reflects this hermetic principle of correspondence. He was not merely repeating teachings, he was embodying a universal truth he learned in the depths of the Egyptian temples, where each symbol, each ritual, each word was a vibrational code to reconnect the being with the whole. Those initiated into the mysteries of Isis underwent trials involving absolute silence, descent into inner darkness, and direct contact with their own primal fears. Isis, the goddess of the soul, represented the feminine principle of creation, the veil that both conceals and protects the sacred. To reach her, the initiate had to pass through the 7 veils, the 7 energy centers, which we now know as chakras. The journey was internal, and the temple was the body. Understanding this symbolic structure clarifies the depth of Jesus' words when he said, "The pure in heart shall see God." The purity was not moralistic, but energetic. The heart, when unobstructed, becomes the true eye of the soul. It is possible that in the hidden chambers of Dendera and Edfu, among living hieroglyphs and vibrational chants, Jesus had his first experiences with the inner light, the one that transcends physical eyes. The rituals of the temples of Thoth were guided by mathematical precision and astronomical alignment. Each initiation took place at specific times of the year, in resonance with celestial cycles. This connection between macrocosm and microcosm is revealed in Jesus' own words, when he compares the human being to a mustard seed, to the yeast that leavens the whole dough, to the salt that gives flavor to life. These are metaphors that carry layers of ancient wisdom, where the small reflects the large, and where the individual's consciousness can affect the cosmic order. Jesus did not speak like an ordinary rabbi. His parables were encodings of spiritual truths, cloaked in simplicity but rooted in humanity's deepest traditions. He did not imitate the Egyptians. He decoded their teachings and made them accessible to all. The energy of Isis is present in every gesture of compassion, in every healing, in every touch that Jesus offers to those considered impure or unworthy. As the universal mother, Isis represents the ability to restore, welcome, and rebuild the fragmented soul. Jesus did this masterfully. He looked beyond the pain, beyond the flesh, and saw the divine trapped, waiting to be freed. This vision is not common. It is the fruit of deep spiritual training from someone who has learned to see with the eye of Horus, the symbol of awakened spiritual vision. And this is exactly what sets his mission apart. He did not bring dogmas, but a vibration field capable of awakening the sleeping spirit in the crowds. It was the magnetism of the initiate who, having passed through the trials of the soul, now radiated what no book could teach, the living presence of the divine. Many scholars overlook the fact that the Essenes, with whom Jesus also would have lived, inherited much of the ancient Egyptian knowledge. Their purification practices, their breathing techniques, their chants in harmony with the solar cycles, all of this was rooted in mystical Egypt. Jesus' journey through the desert, his 40 days of fasting, his communion with nature reflect this hermetic legacy, where self-knowledge is the gateway to the sacred. He understood that each emotion is a frequency, that each thought shapes the field around, that the body is a living temple to be honored and elevated. This wisdom does not come by chance. It is planted in silence, watered by surrender, and harvested when the soul becomes fertile. Egypt gave him the seeds. He made them into eternal flowers. Egyptian mythological figures were not just gods, but representations of the inner aspects of the human being. Isis represents intuition, Osiris wisdom, Horus spiritual vision, and Thoth enlightened consciousness. By integrating these forces within oneself, the initiate would become a Neger, an incarnated god, someone who lives no longer from the ego, but from the divine self. Jesus, in saying, "I and the Father are one," echoes this supreme realization, not as arrogance, but as testimony. He became one with the principle, because he understood and lived the truth that the divine is in everything and everyone. This understanding breaks the boundaries of religion and puts us before a living spirituality, where each being is called to awaken the inner God. The pyramids, far from being tombs, were initiatory schools. Their narrow corridors, their secret chambers, their alignment with the stars, everything was part of a great process of transforming the soul. Jesus, when passing through these places, would have absorbed not only the knowledge, but the very vibration of these sacred spaces. The spiritual memory of the earth pulses there, and those who have eyes to see and hearts to feel awaken memories that have been dormant for lifetimes. Each step between the columns of the temples, each breath in the silence of the chambers, each star observed from the heights of the Giza Plateau, was part of a dialogue between man and the cosmos. And Jesus listened, and in listening he remembered, and in remembering he awakened. It's no coincidence that the first Christian communities, before the institutionalization of Christianity, used hermetic symbols, sacred geometry, and teachings that echoed the principles of Egyptian spiritual alchemy. They knew that Christ was the manifestation of the union between spirit and matter, that he carried within himself the light of the ancients, now accessible to the pure of heart. The true secret was not in what he said, but in what he was. And this was possible because he walked the paths of forgotten wisdom, because he sat at the feet of ancient masters, because he did not cling to the pride of knowledge, but made himself humble to receive what few dared to seek. The return of this wisdom is not just a matter of history, but of collective spiritual destiny. The modern world has forgotten the codes of the spirit, fallen asleep amidst the noise and the rush. But the soul does not forget, and those who seek inevitably rediscover the same portals that Jesus crossed. The wisdom of Isis and Thoth has not died. It is merely hidden, waiting for willing hearts. And this is exactly what Christ's journey reminds us of, that the awakening of the soul is possible, that the divine dwells within the human, and that the path to this union is etched in the stars, in ancient temples, and in the depths of our being. There is an abyssal difference between following an external code of conduct and experiencing, in the deepest part of oneself, the expansion of consciousness that leads to the reconnection with one's own divine origin. Jesus did not come to teach morality or impose beliefs. He brought a state of being, a living vibration that can only be understood by those who dare to dive beyond the veil of the rational mind. What he conveyed was not doctrine, but frequency. And this frequency is born from silent practice, from internal rituals, from journeys that are not made with the feet, but with the heart that burns in search of the eternal. The inner awakening is not about acquiring information, but about burning everything that is not essential. It is a deep, demanding, almost always painful process, but absolutely liberating. Jesus, in following this path during his spiritual exile outside of Israel, assimilated and refined a method that was already ancient, but in his hands, it became life. Silence was his first teacher. In Eastern traditions and Egyptian mysteries, silence is the language of the soul. Within it, the ego finds no support, and the essence can finally emerge. Jesus spent long periods in meditation, in total isolation, absorbing not only ideas but vibrations. He was not seeking intellectual answers, but communion with the source. And it was in this state of silence that his perception began to expand beyond the body and mind, reaching layers of reality that the common senses do not access. True awakening does not occur with noise, but with presence. It is not something learned externally, but revealed internally. In this silence, he accessed the matrix of creation, the invisible field where everything is interconnected, and realized that we are not bodies with souls, but souls dressed in bodies. Breathing, the forgotten tool of consciousness, was another essential instrument in his process of transformation. Eastern traditions, such as Indian pranayama and Tibetan breathing practices, teach that the breath is the bridge between the visible and the invisible. By controlling the flow of breath, it is possible to access altered states of perception, clear emotional blockages, and activate subtle energy centers that remain dormant in almost all of humanity. Jesus deeply understood this. Therefore, when he breathed upon his disciples saying, "Receive the Spirit," he was teaching a subtle key to awakening, the breath as a vehicle of the Spirit. This connection between air and soul, between breath and consciousness, is one of the pillars of the method that he experienced and transmitted. Among the knowledge assimilated by him was the activation of the pineal gland, known in many traditions as the spiritual eye, or the eye of God. The Egyptians represented it as the eye of Horus, the Hindus as the sixth chakra, the Gnostics as the seat of the inner light. This small pine-cone-shaped structure in the center of the brain is not just an anatomical curiosity, but a spiritual antenna capable of capturing subtle frequencies and translating the divine presence into conscious perception. Jesus spoke about seeing without seeing, having eyes and not seeing, because he knew there is another type of vision, one that is only accessible when the pineal is awakened. This awakening requires purification of the body, mastery of emotions, and realignment of thoughts. It is a spiritual science as exact as any equation in physics, but it requires total surrender of the soul. Fasts, internal cleansing practices, baths in consecrated waters, meditation postures, visualizations, and mantras. These were some of the elements that Jesus learned in the initiatory schools he came into contact with, and not as superstition or meaningless rituals, but as precise tools for energy transmutation. The body was seen as a sacred vessel, a temple that needed to be clean, strong, and vibrating in harmony so that the soul could fully manifest itself. When he withdrew for 40 days in the desert, He did not do so out of penance, but to recalibrate his energy, silence external voices, and integrate everything he had received up until then. It was in this process that he faced his shadows, the desires of the ego, the temptations of the world, and overcame them, not with force, but with awareness. The inner awakening, as he experienced and later taught, is a process of death and rebirth, not a physical death, but symbolic, the death of the constructed identity, the wounded ego, the inherited conditionings. This process was known in the mystery schools as the little death, and was considered essential for the initiate to become truly free. Jesus went through this, and in resurfacing, he became a pure channel of the higher will. When he said, "I do nothing of myself, but the Father who dwells in me does the works," he was describing this state of union with the Source, where the ego no longer interferes and the Spirit operates directly. This is not a metaphor. It is a reality that can be accessed by any soul willing to fully surrender to the path. The mind, to him, was a servant and not a mistress. The teachings he absorbed in the Oriental and Egyptian temples emphasized mental stillness as a condition for awakening. When the mind quiets, the heart speaks, and when the heart speaks, the soul guides. The kingdom of the Father that Jesus often cited is not a geographical location, but a vibrational state that is achieved when there is coherence between thought, emotion, and action. This state is not conquered by belief, but by practice, and Jesus knew this. That's why his life was exemplary. Every gesture, every pause, every word was meditated, felt, integrated. He did not just speak about the path, he was the path, a being in a permanent state of alignment with the One. Many of his miracles, poorly understood by common logic, can be interpreted in the light of inner awakening. When he healed, it was because he accessed the frequency of perfect health and anchored it in the body of another. When he multiplied loaves, it was because he transcended the limitation of time and space, accessing the abundance of the quantum field. When he calmed storms, it was because his internal vibration was so high that it interfered with the reality around him. This is not spiritual fantasy, but mastery over the subtle laws of the universe, something that all initiatory schools sought to teach. And Jesus learned, and, even more, he integrated. He was the incarnation of fully activated human potential, the living proof that the Spirit can govern matter. In his parables, he concealed keys to awakening. He spoke about seeds falling on fertile ground, about the grain of wheat that must die to bear fruit, about the hidden treasure in the field, about the narrow door that few find. All these symbols were not moral lessons, but precise indications of the internal process of awakening. He spoke to the heart, not to the intellect, and those who had ears to hear, heard. Those who were ready, understood. For the method of awakening cannot be imposed, it only blossoms on prepared ground. Jesus knew this, and that's why he spoke in code, a code that now, in times of revelation, begins to be deciphered by those who feel the call of the soul. The core of this method was love, not romantic love nor emotional moralism, but love as a universal force, as a vibrational field capable of healing, transforming, and liberating. Love, according to Jesus, was not a feeling, but a presence. When he said, "Love your enemies," he was teaching a spiritual technology, raising the internal frequency beyond duality. This love does not judge, does not demand, does not divide. It simply is. And when a being embodies this state, their presence becomes medicine. Jesus was this medicine, and his practice was love in action, love that sees the divine in everything, even where there is pain, the love that dissolves darkness not with confrontation, but with light. The awakening of the soul is not a spiritual luxury. It is an existential urgency. And the method that Jesus learned, lived, and taught remains as alive today as it was back then. He did not leave a manual, but an energetic trail. And this trail is accessible to those who seek not answers, but transformation. The secret is not outside, but inside. And the temple where everything happens is the heart. What he learned outside of Israel was not something new, but a remembrance of what has always been. And in remembering, he invites us to do the same. The essence of inner awakening is this: to become what one is, to unveil what is hidden, and to live as a conscious expression of the love that moves the worlds. Among all the teachings that Jesus brought to the world, none was more revolutionary, deeper, or more transformative than love. Not a love that's conditioned, limited by beliefs, or shaped by human conveniences, but a love that transcends common understanding. This love, which he lived and radiated, was a living force, a real vibration that dissolved fear, healed invisible wounds, and restored whole souls merely with his presence. Love for Jesus was not a feeling, it was a state of being. And this state was the direct result of everything he had learned, experienced, and integrated on his spiritual journeys through the East, the mystical schools of Egypt, and the secret initiatory orders. He understood that love is the highest frequency a being can vibrate, and that in reaching it, there is no longer a separation between self and other, between creator and creature, between heaven and earth. This love made no distinction between sinner and righteous, between leper and priest, between Roman and Jew. Jesus did not love with the eyes of the world. He loved with the eyes of the soul. He looked at the being behind the mask, at the essence behind the pains, at the divine spark dormant within each one. And this was so challenging for the social structure of the time that it made him a danger. He ate with the outcasts, touched the impure, embraced the forgotten, not as an act of rebellion, but as a natural manifestation of a love that recognized no barriers. This love could not be corrupted because it did not depend on recognition. It flowed like the sun that illuminates good and evil, like the water that nourishes saints and sinners. It was the expression of an awakened consciousness that had dissolved the ego and become a vehicle of the divine. Jesus understood love as the founding principle of the universe. Everything was made by love, through love, and for love. Therefore, every healing, every transformation, and every miracle occurred when this frequency was activated. He knew that healing did not come solely from physical touch, but from a vibrational presence that harmonized the surrounding fields. Jesus' touch was not magical, it was coherent. He was in full resonance with the source, and therefore, wherever he was, chaos was ordered. The mind became quiet, fear was dissolved, because the love that emanated from him was such a pure field of truth that it dissolved all illusions around it. This love was, in fact, the divine word itself in manifestation. It was the "let there be light" acting silently, rescuing what was lost, healing what was fragmented. The heart, according to ancient traditions that Jesus absorbed, was more than a physical organ. It was the throne of the soul. In the Egyptian tradition, the heart was weighed on the scales of Ma'at, and its balance determined the fate of the soul. In Vedanta, the spiritual heart was the center of consciousness. The Essenes taught that the heart was the altar where the soul communicated with God. And Jesus, by uniting these pieces of wisdom, lived from the heart, not as a metaphor, but as the real center of his consciousness. That's why his words touched so deeply. That's why his actions transformed. He didn't just speak of love. He was love itself, vibrating in flesh. This coherence between mind, emotion, body, and spirit is what created the Christic field, accessible not only to him, but to all who purify themselves enough to sustain it. Love for Jesus was also the path to ascension. There was no spiritual escape without passing through the gateway of love. He said, "He who loves knows God, because God is love." Not has love, not acts with love, but is. This changes everything. It eliminates all empty religiosity, all superficial moralism, all belief based on fear. It invites the human being to a living, daily, intimate, and radical practice of love. And to love here does not mean to accept everything passively, but to recognize the divine in everything, even in what challenges, even in what hurts. To love, according to Jesus, is to keep the light on, even when everything around seems darkness. It's not to retaliate. It's not to harden. It's to keep consciousness expanded enough not to identify with the attack, with the offense, with the projected pain of others. During his spiritual practices in Eastern and Egyptian schools, Jesus would have learned about the electromagnetic field of the heart, something that science is only beginning to study recently, but mystical traditions have known for millennia. The field generated by the heart is dozens of times stronger than that of the brain and directly affects the surrounding environment. When someone enters a state of unconditional love, their field harmonizes, resonates with other beings, and activates spontaneous healings, profound insights, and experiences of consciousness expansion. Jesus lived in this state permanently. His heart was a cosmic antenna, and every person who approached felt it, even if they did not understand with their mind. He was a living frequency, and his presence alone was enough to transform dense atmospheres into sacred spaces. He also knew that to love was an act of courage, because truly loving requires vulnerability, surrender, disarmament, and this is deeply threatening to the ego, which is always seeking to protect itself, to assert itself, to defend itself. The love that Jesus taught was the death of the ego. It was the detachment from everything that separates, divides, and isolates. It was the dissolution of the identity built on fear, pride, or control. And that is why few understood him. Because this love is demanding. It doesn't allow masks. It doesn't accept halves. It demands wholeness. And that's why he said, "Those who do not renounce all that they have cannot be my disciple." Not because he wanted the suffering of others, but because he knew that as long as the ego reigns, love cannot flow fully. This love was also the key to forgiveness. Jesus forgave not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. He knew that forgiveness not only frees the other person, but above all, the one who forgives. That holding a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. That non-forgiveness is a vibrational prison. He understood that forgiveness clears the field, dissolves negative bonds, and opens space for light. And that's why he taught forgiveness as a daily practice, as a hygiene of the soul. Forgive 70 times 7 was not a symbolic number, but a clear instruction of constancy. Because love only flows where there is forgiveness, and the heart only expands where there is lightness. The practice of love was, for Jesus, the true worship. He didn't value sacrifices in the temple, but the act of reconciling with one's brother. He didn't demand elaborate rituals, but simple gestures of care and presence. To him, giving water to the thirsty, clothing the naked, visiting the lonely, was more sacred than any liturgy, because he saw the divine in others, and understood that every act of love is an altar erected in the invisible, where light manifests. This vision dissolved sterile religiosity and placed spirituality in the everyday, in relationships, in listening, in empathy. He brought the sacred into life, into the now, into the between us. This love was not fragile. It was the strongest power in the universe. That's why it confronted authorities, denounced hypocrisies, challenged structures. Because to love, for him, was also to tell the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. It was to not condone what destroys the soul. It was to protect the vulnerable. It was to give oneself to the very end. His cross was not a sign of weakness, but the ultimate proof of his unconditional love. He did not die for the sins of the world as divine punishment, but out of love to the extreme, for not backing down, for remaining faithful to love, even in the face of violence. And that's why his death turned into life. Because where there is true love, there is no end. There is resurrection. The mystical method that he learned outside of Israel prepared him to live this love in its entirety. Yes, he learned techniques, but above all, he learned the state, the being. And that's what he transmitted. He didn't want followers, he wanted the awakened. He didn't ask for worship, he asked for practice. He didn't found temples, he awakened hearts. And this legacy still lives, still pulses, still calls. The path of love remains open, and every being who decides to tread it joins him, not by blind faith, but by conscious vibration. Because Christ is a frequency, and love is his language. To love is to become a channel of this presence, and to become a channel is to fulfill the highest purpose of the soul. For centuries, the paths of spirituality were guided by mystery schools that understood the human soul as a constantly expanding energy field. Their teachings, hidden from the outside world, were passed down through oral tradition and coded symbols that only the initiated could decipher. Jesus, in his silent quest for wisdom, crossed the borders of these secret realms, and gained access to practices and knowledge that would never be part of the official doctrine imposed centuries later. The world was not ready for this revelation, as it required real transformation, dissolution of the ego, and complete surrender to the inner light. Therefore, what he lived and learned on his spiritual pilgrimage was later censored, distorted, or simply erased. The rituals he knew and practiced were keys to activating consciousness, awakening the inner divinity, and merging the human with the eternal. They were liberating knowledge, and for that reason, they were considered dangerous. This knowledge was not lost by accident, but deliberately excluded during the councils that determined which texts and teachings would be accepted as sacred. The Council of Nicaea, for instance, did more than organize the Christian faith. It promoted a filtering of content, erasing everything that put spiritual power directly into the hands of the individual. What was silenced? Meditative practices, instructions on the energy centers of the body, teachings about the body of light, the reincarnation of the soul, vibrational mantras, the use of sacred geometry for harmonizing the energy field, and the role of nature as a living temple. Jesus learned and applied all of this, and knowing he could not openly transmit them, he hid truths in parables, gestures, metaphors, and silences that would only be understood by those whose souls were ready. The Essenes, with whom he interacted intensely, preserved many of these rituals. They lived in isolated communities, in tune with the lunar and solar cycles, and practiced the science of the spirit with precision. They purified themselves with water and silence, with fasting and specific body postures. They performed energy alignment rituals at dawn, greeting the light of the sun as a symbol of the inner Christ, and contemplated creation as an expression of divine consciousness. Jesus not only knew them, but deeply absorbed their teachings. With them, he learned the value of emptiness, the potency of sacred sound, and the power of intentional gesture. Each movement, each breath, each word carried purpose. These practices were living rituals, not as theater, but as spiritual science that transformed the energy structure of the being. Among the forbidden knowledge, the use of sound as a tool for healing and expansion stands out. The schools of Egypt, India, and Tibet already understood that the universe is vibration, and that the correct sound can reconfigure the human energetic field. Jesus used specific words, often in original Aramaic, such as Ephatha and Talitha Cum, which were not mere commands, but vibrational keys capable of unlocking energy flows in the subtle body. He knew that the word, when emitted with purity and intention, was a creator. Let there be light was not a poetic narrative. It was a formula, an activation of the quantum field through the voice aligned with the spirit. This knowledge has been forgotten, but it remains alive in the subtext of his gestures. Those who have ears to hear can still catch the invisible notes of Christ's music. Another central aspect of these rituals was sacred geometry. The temples where Jesus studied were not built at random. Each stone, each angle, each proportion followed a divine mathematics that favored altered states of consciousness. The human body was also understood as a sacred geometric structure, with specific centers that could be activated by posture, breathing, and visualization. The symbol of the flower of life, the platonic solids, the concentric circles of initiatory labyrinths, all these elements were present in the environment where he was prepared. The cross, which would later be associated with his death, was already a sacred symbol before that, representing the union between heaven and earth, spirit and matter, masculine and feminine. Jesus knew this symbol and lived it in his body. He was the living cross, the point of intersection between the finite and the eternal. Visualization practices were also present in their preparation. In Tibetan and Egyptian schools, the initiate was trained to visualize light traveling down their spine, activating energy points, and expanding their consciousness beyond the physical body. These visualizations were not fantasies, but gateways. They allowed the individual to access higher dimensions, connect with spiritual guides, and recall their cosmic origin. Jesus, when saying, "The pure in heart will see God," was speaking about this inner vision. He himself accessed subtle planes in deep meditation, receiving instructions and visions that guided his mission. These moments, not recorded in the official Gospels, were fundamental to his transformation. Without them, he would not have become the pure channel that he was. Fasting, so present in his life, was also a sacred ritual. More than a practice of sacrifice, it was a spiritual technology. By suspending food intake, the body entered a state of vibrational cleansing, and the mind became more receptive. The toxins were not only physical, but emotional, mental, and spiritual. Fasting was the gateway to deep listening. And this is how Jesus faced his temptations, not by resisting, but by silencing. He understood that the real battle was not against external demons, but against the internal fragments of the ego that tried to keep the self imprisoned in illusion. Fasting was the fire that burned these layers, and victory, the birth of the inner Christ. There was also the ritual of the secret name. In many ancient traditions, the true name of the being was known only to them and their masters. This name, vibrationally unique, was a code that activated the individual's spiritual field. Jesus knew this. Therefore, when he asked, "Who do you say that I am?" he wasn't seeking validation, but indicating that each being needed to discover their hidden divine identity. The public name was not the name of the soul. The true name was sealed in the heart and could only be revealed after going through the internal initiations. He had discovered his own. And so, when he pronounced "I am," he was not speaking of an individual, but of the manifest divine presence. This consciousness of the "I am" is the core of the forbidden teaching. The divinity within us is not a belief, it is a reality to be awakened. The ritual baths were more than mere symbols. The consecrated waters used in mystical schools aimed to reorganize the subtle fields of the body. They were charged with intention, chants, and geometries. Jesus underwent this type of purification. The baptism in the Jordan, by John the Baptist, was one of these rituals. But contrary to the superficial view that treats it as a ceremonial event, it was a real activation. John, also initiated, knew what he was doing. He recognized in Jesus the prepared field, the clean vessel, the awakened soul. And at that moment, there was a profound energetic fusion. The Spirit descended in the form of a dove because the inner eyes of those who saw were open. That was a vibrational epiphany, a rite of passage, a seal, and Jesus emerged from there not as a common man, but as an awakened consciousness. In the apocryphal Gospels, we find more clues about these rituals. Texts like the Gospel of Thomas, Philip, and Mary Magdalene speak of teachings that involve the body of light, spiritual ascension while still alive, and access to invisible dimensions. They speak of a Jesus who instructs his disciples to become gods, not out of pride, but through revelation. He teaches that the kingdom is within and without, above and below, and that only those who have eyes to see and ears to hear will understand. These texts were banned because they empowered the individual, because they taught that there are no intermediaries between the soul and God, because they said that each being is a temple and that love is the only law. All these rituals and forbidden knowledge form the true hidden body of Jesus' teachings. What was taught publicly was merely the surface. The core he reserved for those who were ready, for those who were not satisfied with dogmas, but sought the truth with a burning heart, for those who knew that awakening requires more than belief. It requires total surrender. He transmitted this knowledge subtly, so that it could withstand time, persecutions, and the fires of ignorance. And now, gradually, this knowledge is resurfacing, because humanity is once again at the crossroads between remaining asleep or awakening to its divine nature. And his legacy, silent, vibrant, and eternal, awaits those who dare to remember. Behind the veil of visible history, where facts fitting within the limitations of human logic are written, there exists a much older, subtle, and vibrational record, the record of spiritual encounters that shape the fate of the earth. And among these encounters, one of the most significant is the connection of Jesus with the Masters of the White Brotherhood, an initiatory order that has been silently guiding humanity in its spiritual evolution for millennia. This brotherhood does not belong to any specific religion, is not tied to physical temples or material hierarchies. It is composed of elevated consciousnesses that have already transcended the cycles of reincarnation and operate from higher planes, inspiring, instructing, and protecting those who sincerely take the path of light. Jesus, before becoming known as the Christ, was received, prepared, and guided by these beings of cosmic wisdom. His journey was closely accompanied by these guides who guard the archetypes of the divine plan for the earth. The mystery schools of Egypt, India, Tibet, and Persia were merely the external expressions of a much deeper and interdimensional core, and it was within these hidden spheres that Jesus gained access to what the ancients called perennial wisdom. He was welcomed by masters who understood the soul as a constantly expanding vortex of energy and the universe as an intelligent field eternally communicating with the human spirit. These were not theoretical teachings, but direct experiences in higher planes of reality. Jesus was led, through deep meditations, to encounter entities that vibrated beyond the frequency of time. Among them were Sanat Kumara, Melchizedek, Confucius, Serapis Bey, El Morya, and other guardians of light who operate from the backstage of human history. These masters did not impose truths, they awakened consciousness. They did not indoctrinate. They ignited the flame of inner recognition, and Jesus recognized them because his soul was already prepared. These encounters did not occur only on subtle planes. Some of them temporarily materialized in sacred places, where the earth's vibration allowed denser manifestations. There are records in occult traditions that report etheric temples in the Himalayas, in Shambhala, where beings of great light trained initiates for specific missions. Jesus, during his hidden time, would have passed through these retreats, where he was instructed not only about universal spiritual laws, but also about the pains of humanity, about Earth's cycles, about collective karmas, about the trials he would face, and about the impact his presence would have on the planet's vibrational fields. He was not improvised. He was shaped like a spiritual diamond with cosmic precision by intelligences that understood the complexity of the human condition and the grandeur of the divine plan for Earth. The masters of the White Brotherhood saw Jesus as an avatar, not in the sense of a being above others, but as a willing channel for the manifestation of the solar logos, the creative intelligence that shapes the universe and sustains life. To allow this manifestation, Jesus needed to reach a state of absolute vibrational purity, where there was no longer any resistance between his personality and his divine essence. This process required not just knowledge, but total mastery over thoughts, emotions, desires, and body energies. He had to learn to neutralize the fluctuations of the mind, remain in a state of absolute presence, and sustain the light amidst the densities of the world. The masters helped him navigate each layer of the ego, overcome each limitation of the flesh, and release each ancestral memory that still connected him to separation. It was an intense process of internal alchemy in which the old man died and the Christ emerged. This alchemy was based on precise practices, such as the energetic transmutation through the violet flame, the anchoring of the golden light in the heart center, the activation of the light body, known as Merkaba, and the expansion of the consciousness field beyond the third dimension. Jesus went through all these stages, not as a privilege, but as a mission. He needed to live each stage to later transmit it through vibration. Each step taken with the masters was recorded in his energy field, and later, each person who touched or heard him was impacted by this frequency. That's why so many were healed just by his presence, because his presence was already a field of highly advanced spiritual technology, coded in the higher planes and anchored in matter through his awakened body. The White Brotherhood also showed him the cycles of humanity, revealing that his birth was not an isolated event, but part of a plan that has been woven since the dawn of civilization. Each avatar that emerged on Earth, Krishna, Buddha, Zoroaster, Moses, and so many others, was a link in this chain of light that prepares humanity for reconnection with its cosmic origin. Jesus came as a synthesis, as the apex of a cycle, as a catalyst for a planetary vibrational change. And he knew this. He did not see himself as a savior of sins, but as a mirror where each human being could recognize their own divinity. His mission was not to be worshipped, but to inspire. It was not to create a religion, but to ignite a silent revolution within the soul of each being. During their spiritual trainings, the masters also revealed to him the dangers of his mission. They told him that the world would resist the truth, that religious and political systems would fear his light, that his presence would provoke intense reactions of love or hate, of surrender or denial. And yet, he accepted, because he understood that the earth needed a vibrational turning point, that humanity needed a living archetype of love, courage, compassion, and presence. He became this archetype not so we would look up, but within. The masters of the White Brotherhood prepared him to be the mirror of the fully realized human soul. He was the example, not the exception, the model, not the myth, the bridge, not the destination. These encounters left deep marks on his consciousness, marks that were later transmitted in the form of gestures, parables, and silences. When Jesus spoke of the kingdom, he was not referring to a distant place, but to a state of consciousness revealed to him during his encounters with the masters. When he said that, "In my Father's house are many mansions," he was referring to the multiple planes of existence that were shown to him. When he said that I and the Father are one, he was expressing the fusion he had achieved with the solar logos. And when he said that you will do greater things than these, he was echoing what the masters taught him, that each human being possesses the same divine potential, and that his mission was merely to remind everyone of this. These encounters, though invisible to the common eye, are recorded in the Earth's vibrational field and in the Akashic records of humanity. Many feel, even without knowing, that Jesus knew something beyond what the official history reports. They feel it because his energy still pulses, because his presence still echoes, because his light still illuminates the forgotten corners of the soul. The White Brotherhood remains active, continues to silently instruct those who sincerely seek, continues to prepare new bearers of light. And today, Jesus is one of the greatest instructors of this order, operating from higher planes as a guide for souls embarking on their awakening journey. Jesus' contact with the Masters was the seed of his mastery. It was the silent preparation for the mission that would change the destiny of mankind. And now, as more and more souls awaken, this truth begins to emerge more clearly. What was once considered mysticism today finds resonance even in quantum physics, neuroscience, and the experiences of consciousness expansion reported worldwide. The time of forgetting is coming to an end, and the silent call he received from the Masters now resonates in all hearts that feel there is something more. This something more is the awakening, and the Brotherhood continues to wait for those who have the courage to remember. What did it truly mean to be the Christ? Beyond the titles, dogmas, and human projections, the word Christ was never Jesus' surname, but a designation of a state of consciousness, a vibrational level where the human being transcends duality, breaks the veils of separation, and becomes a direct vehicle of cosmic light. Jesus' journey was not only of wisdom, but of transfiguration. He was not born ready. He was born with a calling. And it was through the hidden stages of initiation, the discipline of the Spirit, the dive into the inner worlds, that he ascended to what we might call Christ consciousness, a condition where the ego no longer rules, where the I Am reigns sovereign, and where every action, thought, and intention align with the divine flow of the cosmos. This Christ that he manifested is not reserved for one man alone, but is the seed present in every human soul waiting to be awakened. The initiation that Jesus received in the esoteric schools was not a singular event, but a continuous process of dissolution, refinement, and fusion with the whole. Each teaching he absorbed, each rite he went through, each silence he cultivated, prepared him to carry within himself a vibration that could contain the vastness of the solar logos. This logos, or divine word, is the creative intelligence that permeates and sustains all forms of life. Becoming one with the Logos was the pinnacle of initiation, and Jesus went through all the internal stages for this. Purification of desires, alignment of emotions, silencing of the mind, expansion of the heart, activation of the pineal gland, incorporation of the light body, opening of the crown chakra, and finally, the total surrender of personal will. It was the death of the ordinary man and the birth of the eternal Christ. And this birth, contrary to what is thought, did not occur in a single instant, but in waves of consciousness that culminated in his transfiguration. In the tradition of the initiates, This process is known as the passage through the gates of symbolic death. It's when a human being confronts their deepest shadows, their most ancestral pains, their most rooted fears. Jesus experienced this intensely. During the 40 days in the desert, he not only fasted, but faced the collective unconscious. The temptations he faced were not literal, but archetypal. Material power, spiritual manipulation, the pride of being adored. He saw them, felt them, recognized them, and transmuted them. It was at this moment that he died as an individual and was reborn as cosmic consciousness. When he emerged from the desert, he was no longer just Jesus, the man. He was the awakened Christ, ready to radiate a truth that no institution could contain. His initiation was complete, not through an external ritual, but because his inner temple was fully built. The cosmic Christ that he manifested transcends religions and cultures. It is beyond Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, or Buddhism. He represents unified consciousness, the point where all spiritual traditions converge. It is the state where love is not a choice, but essence, where compassion is not an action but breath, where separation dissolves into the perception of absolute unity. Jesus lived this truth. He embodied the Christ so that we too could embody. He became the mirror of who we are in essence. And in doing so, he did not seek worship but recognition. His call was, do the same. And for that, he gave clues, vibrations, symbolic maps that, even fragmented, still today lead to the same realization. The cross, a central symbol of his journey, has been misinterpreted for centuries. It does not represent sacrifice in the punitive sense, but the intersection point between the planes, the vertical, which unites heaven and earth, and the horizontal, which represents the human journey. Jesus accepted the cross because he understood its initiatory meaning. He knew that by allowing the body to be pushed to its limit, the inner light would shine even brighter. His death was not a defeat, but a culmination. By surrendering, he crossed the veils between dimensions and anchored on earth a frequency previously inaccessible to most. The crucifixion was the final rite of his initiation, and the resurrection, the seal of the victory of consciousness over matter, but not as a physical miracle, as a testament to what happens when the lower self surrenders to the divine self. The cosmic Christ is also the one who carries within himself the memory of all ages. Jesus, in his Christic state, remembered his past lives, his roles in different civilizations, his participation in other evolutionary cycles of Earth. He remembered when he walked among the Atlanteans, when he taught in the temples of Lemuria, when he participated in the coding of divine principles in Sumeria. He was an ancient master who now returned to the world to integrate everything that had been separated. That's why he spoke with such authority. That's why his words touched so deeply, because they were not just truths, they were memories. And when listening to him, many felt that they were not learning something new, but reconnecting with something they already knew, but had forgotten. During his most intimate moments with his disciples, Jesus revealed these truths in greater depth. He spoke about the multiple bodies of the human being, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, and how each one needed to be harmonized so that light could pass through without distortion. He discussed the inner worlds, the subtle planes of existence, spiritual guides, and hierarchies of light. He taught about the immortality of the soul, about cycles of incarnation, about non-linear time. He was preparing them to awaken as well. He knew that it was not enough to follow him. One needed to become similar. That's why he said, "The disciple is not above his master, but everyone that is perfect shall be as his master." He wanted to multiply Christs, not worshipers, and that was his greatest revolution. The Transfiguration on Mount Tabor was another milestone of this Christic state. There, in front of Peter, James, and John, Jesus allowed his true vibrational nature to manifest. His face shone like the sun, his garments became white as light, and he conversed with Moses and Elijah, two great initiates who represented the law and the prophets. This experience was a manifestation of the activated light body, the same body that all beings in the process of ascension develop. That moment was the confirmation that he had completed his vibrational transition. He was no longer limited to the flesh. He was a living portal between worlds, a multi-dimensional being operating in full consciousness in the third dimension. And this is not myth, it is highly advanced spiritual technology, accessible to all who walk the path with truth. The Christ consciousness that Jesus radiated manifests as silent wisdom, unconditional love, absolute clarity, and profound humility. He never placed himself above others. On the contrary, he washed the disciples' feet, ate with sinners, walked among the forgotten. Because he knew that, at the essence level, there is no superior or inferior. There is only light at different stages of expression. This humility was the mark of a true initiate. He had already overcome pride, the desire for control, the need to be recognized. He was there only to serve, to enlighten, to reflect what everyone could become. And that's what made him so great. His greatness lay precisely in the absence of personal ambition. He was empty of himself to be filled with light. At the end of his earthly mission, even after facing pain, betrayal, injustice, and death, Jesus kept the Christic field active. He forgave, understood, transcended. His resurrection was not just a spiritual victory, but a reconfiguration of the earth's vibrational field. After his passage, a new cycle began. Humanity had received the frequency of the Christ consciousness. And although this frequency has been distorted, manipulated, and institutionalized, it has never been lost. It is alive. It is accessible. It is within each being that chooses to tread the same path back to the origin. Christ did not die. He multiplied. Today, more than ever, humanity is being called to awaken this consciousness. The world's pains, the collapses of systems, the thirst for meaning, all point to the urgent need for reconnection with the inner Christ. And this reconnection does not require religion, it requires truth. It does not require belief, it requires practice. It does not require intermediaries, it requires courage. Courage to look within, to cross one's own abysses, to be reborn in light. Jesus was the first to clearly pave this way, but each of us is called to tread the same path. The initiation continues, and Christ waits, silently, within the awakened heart of every soul. When Jesus finished his earthly mission, he did not leave behind theological treatises or sacred stone buildings. His legacy was neither architectural nor institutional. What he truly left for the world was a vibrational field, an eternally accessible state of consciousness to all who dared to traverse their own inner desert and touch the divine spark hidden in the center of their chest. This legacy cannot be monopolized by religions, nor fully understood by books. It pulses in the silence of awakening souls, in the sudden gleam in the eyes of those who remember, in the subtle vibration that echoes when the name Jesus is pronounced with reverence, not as dogma, but as a vibration of love. His true teaching was wordless, it was by example, and this example continues to reverberate, to call, to ignite. Because Christ never left the world, he merely changed form. He became field, he became frequency, he became Christ consciousness available to humanity. This legacy is also a call, a deep, silent, almost imperceptible call that whispers in the soul of those who have grown tired of seeking externally, who have exhausted the promises of the world, who have realized that no possession, no achievement, no recognition can fill the existential void that resides in hearts disconnected from their origin. The method that Jesus experienced and taught is more relevant than ever. It's not about repeating ancient rituals or living in austerity. It's about accessing again that point of purity where the soul recognizes that the divine dwells within it and that its mission is not to accumulate, but to become. The path of Christ is the path of being. It is the art of awakening the soul so that it finally remembers who it is, where it came from, and what it came to accomplish in this plane. This awakening is not linear. It happens in waves. Sometimes it's a moment of epiphany, other times a slow crumbling of certainties. In many cases, it's through pain, loss, crisis that the soul begins to listen, because the voice of the Spirit is too subtle for the noises of the ego. And when life seems to crumble, when everything that was known falls apart, a space emerges where the new can arise. Jesus knew this. That's why he said, "You need to be born again." And this new birth is not external, it's not formal, it's internal, it's vibrational, it's invisible. It's when the soul finally begins to guide the being. And at that moment, all of Jesus's hidden teachings cease to be theory and become living practice. No more words, presence, no more belief, incarnation. The method he lived by and left behind is organic, adaptable, universal. It can be practiced in silence, amidst nature, in daily routine. It doesn't require a temple, but surrender. It doesn't require gurus, but sincerity. It starts with small actions, observing one's own thoughts, aligning emotions, choosing love over fear, serving instead of demanding, silencing rather than reacting, breathing with presence, walking with awareness, praying with the heart. Each intentional gesture of alignment with love is a particle of Christ consciousness manifesting itself. And when these gestures accumulate, the soul blossoms. It begins to radiate light, to heal wounds without words, to touch hearts effortlessly. This is what Jesus did, and it's what each of us is called to do. The legacy of the awakening of the soul is also the return to the body. Jesus did not deny matter, he transcended it. He demonstrated that the body is a temple, an instrument, a vehicle. He took care of the body with fasting, with walks, with rest, with touch. He respected the nature of the body, but did not identify with it. This is a key principle, because as long as we identify with what is transient, we will remain trapped in illusion. But when we understand that we are eternal consciousness temporarily experiencing a physical form, everything changes. Suffering becomes relative, attachment dissolves, fear loses its strength, and love finally takes its throne. Jesus taught this with his gaze, with his silence, with his presence that transcended walls and hearts, and this is what he invites us to experience. This awakening also involves taking responsibility, because once the soul begins to remember, there is no turning back. Distractions lose their luster, addictions lose their taste, superficiality becomes unbearable, and the being begins to seek the real. Not the real of the external world, but the real that pulses at the core of the being. This real is the divine in action. It's the peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, the joy that doesn't depend on stimuli, the love that doesn't depend on reciprocity. Jesus was this rock, and in teaching that everyone could be like him, he was saying that this rock is available to all, but it demands that everything that is not true crumble. And this process, although painful, is liberating. The hidden teaching of Jesus, the one that was not told, that was veiled by the councils, censored by institutions, and hidden under layers of theology, is now accessible as never before. Because the time has come, the time of return. Not of his return as an external messianic figure, but of Christ within each human being. This return will not be televised, nor announced by trumpets. It will be silent, internal, revolutionary. It will be the ascension in life, the activation of solar consciousness, the alchemical marriage between soul and spirit. It will be the new human emerging from the ashes of the old. And when this Christ-like human arises, he will recognize in Jesus not only the Savior, but the brother, the mirror, the precursor, the proof that light can overcome shadow even in the densest world. This awakening is not collective in the conventional sense. It happens one by one, in moments of silence, pain, beauty. Each soul that awakens lights a torch, and this torch illuminates others. This is the true mystical body of Christ, a network of awakened souls, connected by love, serving the divine plan, not by imposition, but by joy. These souls are everywhere, in cities and forests, in hospitals and schools, in urban centers and simple communities. They do not announce themselves, but they act. They do not seek titles, but live in coherence. They are the new temple. And Jesus, in his eternal wisdom, knew that this time would come. That's why he spoke in parables. That's why he taught in layers. That's why he left clues. Because the true disciple is the one who seeks, who feels, who listens with the heart. This is the legacy that transforms. It's not a closed system, but a living flow. It's not a philosophy, but a vibration. The awakening of the soul is the return to the inner home, to the point of origin, to the primordial silence. Jesus traversed it with courage, surrender, and truth. And today, the same path is before each of us, not as a paved road, but as an invisible trail that reveals itself step by step as one walks. The first step is the call. The second, the choice. And with each choice for love, for compassion, for truth, another layer of forgetfulness dissolves. And Christ, who seemed distant, reveals himself as an internal presence. The journey continues, and the awakened heart is the compass that leads to the home that never ceased to be within us. And now, Mind Unfettered, tell me, which part of this journey ignited something within you? Have you ever felt that there is something greater calling you in the silence? Share in the comments your vision on the true purpose of the soul. When we manifest together, the light expands in a network. And if this revelation moved you, wait until you see what's coming next. Click now on the video on your screen. The Book of 33 Steps, the Hidden Map. Jesus left for enlightenment. In it, we will decipher step by step the hidden map left by Jesus for those who are ready to activate the Christ consciousness while alive. Are you ready to climb the steps of truth? I'll meet you there, awakened soul.